I don't even know where to begin to explain this huge mess. My mother remarried when I was 5 years old to a man who already had a daughter 2 years older than me. At the time, I was too young to fully comprehend what was happening, but I knew that my life was about to change drastically. In my youthful innocence, I hoped for a loving family unit, the kind you see in storybooks or TV shows. But instead of the warm, harmonious family life I imagined, what I encountered was a world that seemed cold and uninviting. My stepfather, though not overtly hostile, was distant and often seemed annoyed by my presence. As a child, these things felt monumental, way heavy on my heart, and leaving me to question my place in this new family dynamic. I tried my best to adapt, to win over his affection, or at least acceptance, but it never felt like enough. My attempts at connecting with him were met with indifference or subtle disapproval. It became clear to me, even at such a young age, that I was not considered his in the same way his daughter was. This realization stung and formed the roots of insecurity that I am still cautious of even today. And then there was my stepsister. 2 years older than me, she had the advantage of being the authoritative elder in our little duo. I looked up to her, desperate for companionship and approval, yet what I received in return was far from sisterly warmth. She would play pranks on me, little mischievous games that, in hindsight, seemed calculated and cruel. Perhaps they were attempts to assert dominance, or maybe they were prankish behaviors encouraged in competition for attention. These were not the playful antics of siblings trying to get a rise out of each other. Rather, they were mean-spirited acts that left me feeling isolated and hurt. One time, I remember her hiding my favorite toy, a stuffed bear that I had been given by my biological father before he divorced my mother. I searched everywhere, distress creeping in as I realized it was nowhere to be found, only to eventually discover it buried in the backyard, caked in mud. She laughed at my distress, a sound that echoed a painful reminder that this family was not as it should be. Of course, I went to my mother, hoping for solace, for the loving arms that had always comforted me in the past. But her responses were always puzzling. Instead of the sympathy or understanding I craved, I was met with admonishments. She seemed exasperated by my tears and my accounts of bullying behavior, brushing it off as childish squabbles. Her words were like another blow to the heart. "You have to stop throwing tantrums and being a nuisance," she would say. Those words were a clear indication that my stepsister, who should have been reprimanded for her actions, felt more and more protected. Each time I sought refuge in my mother's embrace, I instead collided with a cold wall of indifference. It felt as if she was slipping away from me, choosing instead to align herself with her new family. My pleas felt like echoes that never reached her, as if I were shouting into a void where my needs were muted by the weight of their disregard. The patterns repeated, the pranks escalated, and I internalized the pain, slowly learning to stifle my cries for help. I felt watched yet unseen, in a household that should have been my sanctuary. As a bright-eyed 5-year-old, I couldn't comprehend why my mother seemed to side with this new family over me, her own child. Each reprimand added layers to my growing shell of mistrust and insecurity. And the more my mother dismissively waved away my concerns, the more emboldened my stepsister grew. Life became a daily challenge of navigating these relationships, handling the unspoken nuances of a family that had yet to find its cohesive rhythm. I learned early to mask my discomfort and present the facade of a well-mannered, agreeable child, hoping that if I behaved perfectly, I might be seen as worthy of the love and attention I so desperately sought. What I lacked was the family I thought was promised with this new chapter in my life. Instead, my youth became a lesson in recognizing the coldness in others, in understanding that ill treatment often wears the mask of playful antics. On my 8th birthday, the day was supposed to be filled with laughter, songs, and sweet frosting-covered cake, a day that should have been a highlight of my childhood. Instead, it turned into a memory tangled with emotions that still linger. As the event unfolded at our home, surrounded by family, my heart was filled with a little girl's genuine excitement. Balloons were tied around the room, each a burst of color, and the cake was positioned at the center of the celebration, its candles unlit but glowing with potential. There was an almost magical hum of anticipation in the air. Relatives gathered, their faces glowing with fondness and goodwill as they indulged in snacks and chattered amongst themselves. But amidst this cheerful atmosphere, my stepsister loomed like a shadow. Her eyes darted mischievously as she watched me. I remember acutely that sense of something about to happen, though, naive as I was, I never could have predicted the act that followed. At what should have been the pinnacle of joy, gathering around the cake, ready to sing, to make a wish, my stepsister struck. She did it with the calculated ease of someone who had rehearsed. In a swoop, she nabbed a piece of cake, creamy icing and all, and before I could even draw a breath to protest, she had smeared it ecstatically into my hair. I felt the cold cream hit my scalp, and for a moment the room spun around me, tinged with the betrayal of being humiliated in front of the very people who should have protected me. I stood there, paralyzed. It was like a scene frozen in time, where my chest tightened with embarrassment and shame. But serendipity would have it that my grandmother and aunt, whose eyes seemed to never miss a thing, witnessed the entire stunt. Their stern voices cut through the atmosphere as sharply as the slice of cake now ruined in my hair. They rose to their feet, words of rebuke spilling like tidewater as they scolded my stepsister, their voices firm and unwavering. A room that had been a vibrant haven for my birthday celebrations shifted into grounds for confrontation. What followed was a cacophony of voices, each one rising to defend or accuse, depending on where they stood in the familial divide. My mother, to my bewilderment and sorrow, chose to defend my stepsister. Her words, once comforting, now felt like thorns. She dismissed my stepsister's actions as harmless fun, a misunderstanding in the midst of a child's play. It erupted then, a full-blown dispute as family members, uncles, aunts, and cousins alike turned their verbal fire on my mother. They rallied around me in a circle of protection, their faces a tapestry of incredulity and outrage. My relatives, it seemed, could see through the facade that had clouded my mother's vision. I watched as my grandfather, a solid presence, stood firm against the mounting storm. He was the voice of reason, deep and steady, as he presented my mother with an ultimatum that seemed to split the earth beneath my feet. He said clearly that the time had come for her to choose where her priorities lay, to remain loyal to a husband who allowed his daughter to torment me, or to stand by her own flesh and blood. In that intense moment, the focus turned solely onto her. Everyone awaited her response, caught in tense stillness, the echo of my grandfather's challenge hanging heavily in the air. Those few seconds seemed to stretch into eternity, while my breath caught in my throat as I awaited the verdict on my fate. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice a fragile whisper against the silent expectation. She chose, though perhaps not realizing the full gravity of her decision, to side with my stepsister and her husband. Her assent meant that her little girl, the one standing in front of her with icing in her hair and a fractured heart, was not her priority. The heartbreak fell upon me like a wave, its impact deep and devastating. It wasn't just a momentary hurt, but an etching of abandonment into my very being. I felt the familial ties that I had clung to unravel, watching the lines being drawn right in front of me between the people who would fight for me and my mother, who could not. Yet, I remained silent, stunned by the harsh clarity of reality. Helped by the steady hands of my uncles, I began to pack my belongings. It was surreal, collecting pieces of my childhood into a suitcase while absorbing that there was no home for me in my mother's heart anymore. Each item that I folded felt wrapped in layers of unspoken words and redundant tears that I would not allow to fall. That evening, I left my first home, turning away from the life that should have been mine and towards the unknown of living with my grandparents. As the car pulled away, the weight of what just happened swirled around me until we parked in the comforting embrace of my grandparents' home. It was there that the floodgate finally opened, and I sobbed for the mother I lost in the noise of that birthday catastrophe. In those fleeting moments of transition, from the only family structure I knew to a new one forged by circumstance, a profound sadness settled into my bones. Each passing moment stretched on, coloring everything: the car ride, the headlights against the night, even the sound of the road beneath us in vibrant shades of loss. In the safe embrace of my grandparents, however, I found a refuge that reached out to stabilize my shaking world. My grandparents' home was familiar, yet it carried a tangential feeling of displacement at first. Merely a week's visit for vacations in the past had never prepared me for this unexpected permanence. Every room was saturated with warmth and unconditional love, forming a stark contrast to the chilly indifference that had shadowed my life in the other home. Here, my pain was acknowledged and embraced, and kindness was a constant mantra that healed slowly but surely. Surrounded by the gentle rhythms of my grandparents' lives, a new chapter began. My grandparents' steadfast resolve to cocoon me from any further emotional harm made it clear they would never waver in their support. Although my heartache wouldn't switch off easily, their patience granted me the space to process the turbulent emotions swirling inside me. It turned out, their household rules were kind yet disciplined, a melody that guided me back to normalcy. I was prompted to attend therapy, which was initially daunting. Peeling back layers of hurt felt more like exposing raw wounds than healing them. But as each session passed, the memories and feelings that seemed immovable gradually began to shift. I unpacked the intricate web of emotions I always carried: abandonment, betrayal, confusion. The gradual support helped smooth the jagged edges of my internal monologue, reshaping it into one of resilience rather than despair. Throughout this, my life resumed in fresh ways. School became more than a mere routine distraction. It was a sanctuary where I could hope to reshape my narrative away from the turmoil that used to define me. Friendships, once hard to maintain under the parental atmosphere at my mother's, blossomed naturally, encouraged by a newfound sense of belonging and encouragement instilled at home by my grandparents. The presence of my uncles, aunts, and all other family members who had rallied behind me on that chaotic birthday provided strength. Each of them encircled me with assurances that I belonged, that I mattered. This network knitted together every small victory, weaving a new tapestry of support. My mother's world, I learned, had morphed into one of regret and isolation. Her attempts to reach out after those initial moments of rejection were met with firm, protective boundaries crafted by my grandparents. Their promise to safeguard me applied as strongly in words spoken as it did in silent vigilance. As time marched forward, the distance between my mother and me grew as constant as the sun's passage. I was cocooned in a caring bubble where disappointment and fear began to shrink in significance, giving way to more hopeful feelings of self-worth and empowerment. I hadn't envisioned such estrangement to last indefinitely, yet no miracles unfolded to bridge our divide. My mother's role in my life remained painfully vacant, a void papered over by the determined warmth of my chosen family. Though I couldn't forget or forgive her decision, therapy illuminated clarity within that complex tangle, that I could choose my attachments and redraw the lines of my emotional terrain. In the years that followed, my heart settled into rhythms of gratitude for this second chance at familyhood. Each graduation, birthday, and everyday moment spent in the company of those who loved me unconditionally were my reminders that life's second drafts could be printed with care and joy. The past was no longer a shadow, but an understanding on which my inner strength stood firm. Yet with all the success in embracing my new life, the ghost of my old pain lingered, ghostly yet persistent. Whenever stirred, as it sometimes was by unexpected reminders or late-night reflections, I allowed it space, acknowledging it as part of my story, but not the whole tale. Life, I learned, sewn together with experiences both tender and painful, continued to bloom. Spurred by dreams and ambition, I forged ahead with the soft encouragement of my family steadily guiding me. I discovered the beautiful harmony in our created family, a tapestry of love and lessons woven together, leaving no spaces for the doubt my former life had sown in abundance. I realized healing was neither linear nor absolute, but a journey in itself, one my grandparents' unwavering commitment made possible. They granted me a precious gift through their choice, a family that refused to sever edges frayed by another's decisions. In the mosaic of life's continued puzzle, they were the crucial piece that saved me from unraveling completely, and for that, I loved them deeply. However, what my grandfather did not specify was that giving up on me meant relinquishing her connection to an intricate web of relationships. Once I moved in with my grandparents, a fortress of love enveloped me, cutting all ties with my mother in a solidarity that reverberated across our family. My grandparents were the cornerstone of our family, and their decision influenced my uncles and cousins, generating a ripple effect that reached every branch of our family tree. Within just a couple of days, my mother found herself isolated, estranged from her kin, a status she had not anticipated or prepared for. Her assumptions of a seamless transition unraveled rapidly, painted with the colors of shock and sorrow that she had not foreseen. Driven perhaps by desperation or remorse, she attempted fervently to mend the threads of communication, deploying calls and messages like lifelines cast into an uncaring void. No responses met her appeals. Her attempts crumbled like waves against rocks, met with stoic silence from family members who stood united with my grandparents' stand. It was inevitable, perhaps, but my mother, laden with regret and an awakening to the gravity of her past actions, appeared one day at my grandparents' doorstep. Her face carried the earnestness of a plea backed by promises to right her wrongs, a face softened by tears, asking not just my forgiveness, but the family's as well. She brought with her the weight of her realization, admitting she had chosen her new family over her own flesh and blood. Yet, even as her words painted pictures of regret, they failed to bridge the chasm of trust her actions had created. Relying on the steeliness instilled within me and the protection promised by my grandfather, I refused her pleas to reunite. My heart, still a battlefield of emotions ranging from pain to resolve, faltered slightly as the person who had once been my entire world stood looking hopeful yet defeated on the threshold of my new life. Despite the upheaval her presence caused in my heart, my resolve remained firm. Rebuffed, she left with nothing to show for her efforts except the cold reminder of her own choice years ago. The issue did not rest there, as my grandparents, true to my grandfather's nature, held the family's unity intact. They had anticipated such a moment. her coming back, weaving apologies. My grandfather had taken steps to protect both myself and my new family dynamic by considering measures that would prevent any further disturbances. They made it explicitly clear that my mother was not welcome unless my consent accompanied her entry, warning her that any further intrusion would see legal boundaries invoked to shield against unwanted distress. It painted a picture of committed love and safety around me, a barrier too strong for any remnants of my past to penetrate. In their arms, I found not just a new home, but a citadel guarding my unwounded spirit. My grandparents' vigilance and care nurtured each delicate layer of healing that began blossoming within, demonstrating without words their unwavering will to safeguard my happiness. Years passed under their roof, and those initial wounds of abandonment that felt peeled open began knitting themselves into scars of experience. Marks carrying stories of survival and resilience. In living with my grandparents, I found strength I did not imagine existed, stitched together with time's needle, creating a tapestry formed by both our shared and individual triumphs over adversity. But life has a way of bringing the past right back to your doorstep. It was during the sorrowful occasion of my grandfather's funeral that my mother resurfaced, uninvited and unexpected. My grandfather, in his foresight, had explicitly stated on his deathbed, loud enough for everyone to hear, the parting words of a protective parent, that his daughter, who had once discarded her own, should not dare to appear at his farewell. He had even inscribed this directive into his final wishes, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Yet here she was, bathed in tears and regret, trying fervently to push through the boundaries our family had methodically reinforced around us. It never occurred to me that she would have the audacity to show up, but she did, attempting to lay claim to mourning a man she hadn't spoken to in decades. Her entrance was met swiftly by my grandmother and uncle, the protectors of the perimeter, who reminded her of her estranged position and voiced my grandfather's wishes. They stood firm, rooted in loyalty to his command, as she lamented her plight, insisting she had a right she had lost long ago, like grasping at phantom strings that slipped through her fingers. My uncle reminded her of the incontestable words in my grandfather's will, a constant testament to the breach she herself had created. My mother, faced with this unyielding allegiance, crumbled and was gently but firmly shown the door. The ordeal didn't end there. I found her in the parking lot, a mess of imploration and tears. Her words were as desperate as they were begging, stressing how she regretted every misplaced priority she had set. I stood there, swaying between the anger of a heart scarred and the temptation of an olive branch extended. But logic prevailed over emotion. I simply told her, the woman who had once called herself my mother, that my life continued without that missing role, and her past decisions severed the mother-daughter tapestry beyond repair. The drive home left me drained, and to seek comfort, I reached out to my grandmother, the unwavering bastion of support. Her words were simple yet profound: to follow my heart. The past weeks have been a tumult of resurrected pain and prerequisites for healing, feeling both the weight of resentment and flickers of doubt about sincerity, wondering if time truly heals or just numbs. And now I stand, staring into the open future, wondering which path genuinely leads to peace.